welcome Max on a rainy day.
Rainy Sunday, Broadstairs.
Yeah.
Typical English summer.
Shine and showers.
Yes.
Well, on the way here, we got some messages about blood group B and the PGLFs.
Okay.
From a researcher that's been with the BASIS project for a very long time, is doing a heck of a lot of work, specifically involving the Nazi bases,
right,
the concentration camps that Barry King is referred to in Germany, and the use of concentration camp victims in precise blood groups. And you concurred that she was just messaged me saying that the Germans are very interested in blood group B, and they used this in a programmable generated life form so they could then take grey souls.
Right, and you superimpose that into the body. Okay, I think that the Germans are not only interested in blood group B. I think they're also extremely interested in any of the rhesus negative blood, particularly O negative and actually AB negative. AB negative is the rarest of all of the rhesus negative blood groups. But going back to B, B positive or B negative blood group works like a hive blood group, works like a hive mind blood group. Not to say that anybody who has B blood is not an individual themselves, it's just on a collective level. They are working for a single agenda without knowing it. So if you could amass a huge amount of people with blood group B, then you could have a sort of an army working for you, and each individual would be unknown that they are actually part of the collective.
Well, that would be some kind of a gang stalking situation then, where you could get an awful lot of people who would respond to that.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of people who have blood group B.
Now, it's interesting from my point of view, and also some more work that's been, data that's been published, is on Andrew Power has written a very important book about Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs.
Yes. And
Ben, the hospital porter, has done a bit of an analysis on that and had a chat with Andrew Power. He's Andrew Power, somebody who's did some research about the matrix control of Ireland, and how the Battle of the Boyne was actually a ritual and not a battle. But the important thing about this is another person has found out that Northern Ireland is very highly rhesus negative.
Okay.
So from the point of view of programming people...
Yes, it's a lot easier to do. And that's why you have, Northern Ireland is a extraordinarily locked down facility, and the upside to having O negative blood or rhesus negative blood is that it has and absorbs a much higher amount of oxygen into it. So the body allows far more oxygen into the blood. So, for example, if you were a runner, or if you were a fighter, or if you did anything physical, your endurance would be longer and you would be more explosive. The downside to having rhesus negative blood is that they run out of steam very quickly. They have to stop and they have to regroup and then go again. The O positive blood has a much longer endurance. It's not explosive. So if you had an army of rhesus negative an army of rhesus negative, then they would be excellent in a very short term. They could destroy something that's necessary very, very quickly. It's just that only lasts for a very short period of time. They're very explosive, but then they burn out quickly.
So you'd use them hit hard,
and then pull out, and then use your endurance.
Yes.
But they do hit harder than any other of the blood streams, and then there's the nature of the blue blood, because the oxygen into the blood, then it's a higher copper content. Thus, when oxygen hits the blood, it turns a slightly bluish color.
So is that related to the Greys or reptilians or the two families?
Most all of the reptilian beings, the Alpha Draconis, and if there's 6 or 7 types of reptilians that are on this planet. Some snakes, some velociraptor looking, some actually look like dinosaurs, but generally they have, the shape-shifting ones all have rhesus negative blood. You don't, okay. Okay, so with the Supersoldier topic, the benefits of having the rhesus negative are that it is easier for the queen, quote unquote, queen bee to take control of all the rhesus negative, because they are working like that. But they do have O positives working also with them. It's just the O positive are a lot more difficult to control, but through trauma, I mean, it's like we were talking about earlier, a lot of the children die when they go through this process, but the ones who do survive, the O positives that do survive, are extremely beneficial to that, because the endurance goes on and on and on and on and on.
So what about the current situation? The last interview you mentioned a lot of the children that died in your program.
Yeah.
Could you really describe what your program involved? And of course this connects us with James, who's now being arrested.
Okay. So I have flash sort of memories, and they start from really when I was at the first school that I went to, which was in Sussex, and I started to have memories then. And then after that they were sporadic. So then after that I sort of remember being, so first of all maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, then nothing, and then more like 11, 12, 13 years old, and then when I sort of blocked it out. Then as I reached my mid to late 20s, I wasn't able to block it out anymore. I think that I began to use drugs or alcohol because I didn't want to face what was going on.
When did you start this? When did this happen?
In terms of self-abuse in that way, well, it started when I was very, very, very young. When I was 2, 3, 4, 5, I have multiple memories of things coming into my room, and it always happened in the room. And they were some nasty things.
What do you mean by nasty things?
Sort of sexual, intrusive sexual things. A lot. I remember seeing a lot of witches, sort of minds, like stereotypical looking sort of witches. I would be taken out of my bed. I'd sort of float up above my bed, float up through the roof of the house, up further and further, and then I'd go through a set of black clouds. I'd go above the black clouds, and then I'd sort of see even almost like a stereotypical looking Macbeth, the witches of Macbeth, sort of round a cauldron, and they'd be cackling. And then when I'd see that, I'd go into shock and I'd freeze, and then I'd kind of black out and feel myself lying back in the bed again. So because this went on continuously when I was very young, and I used to call for my parents, and then after a while they stopped coming, so I had to start dealing with it myself. Now, when I was 15, 16, 17, I'd sort of forgotten that had happened. When I was 15, 16, 17, something happened, and something triggered me, and I think it was probably a very close friend of mine said something, and I heard a click in my head, and I remembered all the things that had happened again.
What happened?
All the things I just talked about, which were the unpleasant things as a kid. They all came back at once.
I mean, do you think, when did that happen? I mean, do you think you were being deprogrammed or something?
I think something was happening where, I mean, the main thing that they didn't want to me is to ever remember anything like this. They want me to think that I've had a straight, normal sort of life with its ups and downs that everybody has, but my reality is this, and that's what it was. And when I started to remember when this happened when I was 17, I freaked out, I panicked. And when I panicked, I had all these flashes back that when the sun started to come down, I started to get this terrible, terrible feel like something bad was going to happen.
So what was the sun?
I don't know what it was really, but I was fine. I would usually, this is in England, I would usually be fine up until about 6 or 7 o'clock. And then when the sun started going down and started getting dark, all these feelings started to invoke inside of me, like whatever happened when I was a kid was about to happen again. So I started to self-medicate, and I used to drink wine with my...
what do you mean by self-medicating?
So I used to drink wine with my mum. when I was 17, 18. And I found when this started to happen, I found I'd have a glass of wine or I'd have a beer or whatever, and slightly these feelings and these memories would subside. So I'd sort of worked out, well, shit, if I don't want to feel these things anymore. So I found something that will repress them. So that was around 17, 18. And when I learned the medication, how to self-medicate, it sort of perpetuated itself from there. So then I learned, okay, well, I don't want to feel that way. I'm going to do whatever I can to not feel that way. So what happens is when you keep repressing and keep repressing and keep repressing, it sort of becomes like a boiling point. You can only repress to a certain extent before everything comes out in one go. There had been a number of times through my 20s when I had realized that that addiction had become part of me, not for fun, but it had become part of a way of life for me because I didn't want to address any of those things. And it does work very well, because if you use that, you can basically believe or convince yourself that none of this stuff ever happened. Leading on from there, as I turned towards 30 years old, I had a complete snap.
In the Monarch program,
yes,
it seems that once you hit about 30, the Monarch program starts to decline.
It seems to me that the alters and the programming start to bleed through and break down around that age. So and I was part of alpha programming, beta programming. Alpha being there's delta programming as well. So I was actually thrown into all of those things. But they started to bleed through. I turned 30, just past 30, 31, and there was nothing I could do about it. Delta.
Those categories of programs, just
yeah. Delta programming generally is a form of assassination or a form of getting information through physical means. Yes. So this is it's sort of your basic military attack programming. That's what that is. That's Delta. Beta programming is used 80%, usually 80%, which is Monarch, 80% of women, and there are 20% of men which are used, which is also sexual programming. So giving and receiving information through sexual means. So a spy would be able to go meet up with somebody, have sex with them, and then download the information that was necessary from the person to collect it into their cells, then go back to whoever you are working for, have sex with this person, and then download the information to this person. So it is all done through that means.
Now, how do they do the download?
How do they do it?
When you say download, you sort of look at somebody's eyes.
Okay, so as soon as the sexual act is done, then the two energy fields of the people merge. And if you are shown or trained in a specific way, most often unconsciously, then this information is then downloaded to the energy field of that person. And then you can be hooked up to a machine, or you can have sex with somebody else, and then that person gets the information. It's being done a lot by the Russians. They're sending out 13, 14, 15-year-old girls out into certain areas in the US and the UK, and sex acts will be done with high businessmen, and the information then will be taken and given back to where the KGB, if that exists. You know what I mean?
So it's been still in use. It's very effective.
It's very effective because nobody thinks that is the way that it's done.
And
Absolutely.
then the whole point is that the actual person themselves doesn't know they've got the information.
Yeah, absolutely. Most often.
Right. And then the other thing is that if you get rid of that person, your resources, you haven't really expended too much resources.
No, because there's plenty of other ones who can do the job again. Now,
is this where these children are collected? I mean,
okay, so going back to that, so when I was talking about the children who were involved, so that I'm going to mention Montauk, which is just off of New York. I'm not exactly sure that I was in Montauk, but when I look at it, it is very familiar to me. But wherever I was, it was an identical layout and setup to the Montauk experiment. And then there are a number of other ones just exactly like that.
Now, this is very important because Lisa is doing an awful lot of work on this, and she's collaborating with Peter Moon, who's written a lot of the Montauk
Love Peter
books.
Moon, yes.
You know, there's a whack of stuff going on there, connecting with this concentration camps.
Yeah.
But there's smoke signals which indicate that Rudloe Manor,
yes,
and Warminster, very close to Devizes in Wiltshire, may have had some kind of involvement with this stuff, but that's only just little whiffs of smoke. The thing is that a previous soldier who's spoken is saying that there's something that the stuff that he was exposed to was in the artillery. It's just horrendous stuff.
Yeah. In terms of that, what I have seen is I've seen those spiders that are about. I have to be when I see them. I'm in an in-between state. It's not like I can look up and see them now, and it's just before I fall asleep, or if I'm in like an in-between state. That's when I see them, and they're about this big, and they seem more mechanical than actual beings. And I've seen them many times, and sometimes maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 of them crawling across the ceiling. Not only that, when I was living in an apartment in Los Angeles, I fell asleep one time. And I knew I was under attack at that moment, and I heard these things rushing and across the ground, and they were squeaking and they were sort of scuttling around. And when I looked at them, I could see that they sort of looked. I know it's going to sound strange, like gremlins. They looked like actual from the movie Gremlins, and they sort of seemed to be mischievous things to cause sort of more chaos, and they always seem to be around when there was these shadow beings around too. So whatever these little scuttle things are controlled. And
well, a lot of people are now seeing these things.
The ones that run along the ground?
Scuttlers. I saw them first in a transmitter. Kerry Cassidy says she's seen them. Lisa's seen them. Some of the crop circle people have seen them. Big things, very large ones.
Yeah, these ones I see are about this big, and they look like gremlins. They have ears like that. They have teeth. They make noise and they laugh. They're just like mischievous, like running around things.
And they're not nice.
No, they're not nice, but they're not evil. But they're mischievous, and they're working for something. They sort of hide things, and they sort of they bring around sort of negative energy too. That ties in with something that, if I can just say this ties in with something very bizarre that happened. I was living in an apartment 222, which ties in with these things. This was in Los Angeles, and one morning I got a letter in the mail, and the letter was addressed to me, and it was from something called the Neptune Society. And I'd driven when driving down Ventura Boulevard in Los Angeles, there's this huge building. You can't really see, there's windows, but you can't really see anything about it. And on the top it says Neptune Society. That's all, there's nothing else. So I'd seen it since I was a kid. I never knew anything about it. I received a letter in the mail, and it said the Neptune Society. I opened the letter, and all the letter was saying, it says, "Dear Mr. Spiers, have you ever considered being cremated when you die? Cremation," and it gives me all these reasons why cremation is a far better way to go than being buried. And it was about this long, and it was signed at the bottom, "If you have any more queries or anything else, please don't hesitate to contact us." So I left it on the side of the breakfast area where I was, and then I went to sleep that night. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning I woke up, and I heard this crackling sound, and I sat up, and the whole of my kitchen was on fire. All the front of the breakfast area was on fire. The food was on fire. The flames were like coming off like this.
Now, was this actual or virtual?
It was actual flames.
All right.
All the top of the thing was burned, and the letter that was on there had completely burned out. I ran up, I jumped, I put the fire out, and also all the gas was turned on. All the gas from the oven was turned on.
Ah.
Now,
well, that would be one way of cremating you.
Yes, I thought that was extremely...
Probably doesn't do a very good job, though.
I had feelings it was connected to the Hellfire Club. And because
you mentioned the Hellfire Club is interesting because I think it involves Jimmy Savile and also the methodology of Marie Kiali's daughters.
Really?
attempted incineration in hospital.
They like that. There's something because there's something about the element of fire which allows these beings to come
the
through.
ring of fire.
Yes. Well, there you go back to the Johnny Cash song. That's the Ring of Fire. Johnny, he's talking all about that. That's what he's talking about. It's a hellfire ritual. But when I got up that morning to leave the house, there was a black Suburban, tinted windows Suburban sitting outside the front of my building, and on the license plate it said "Blow You Up." And as I woke up,
so they were that was in the dream.
This is real.
Oh, this was real.
The flames were real. Waking up was real. The car was real.
So they're basically letting you know.
That was 2011 that happened. And you know what day it happened? It happened on August the 12th. And August the 12th is a very specific day because it is connected when Sirius is at its highest point in the sky. August 11th, 12th, and 13th are called the dog days because the dog star is the most visible. Now, Crowley got married on August the 12th because he sees it as when Sirius has its highest effect on this planet, and he was trying to bring in an
that
open.
Wouldn't happen every August the 12th, would it?
What's that?
It wouldn't happen every year, would it?
What doesn't happen every year?
That Sirius would have its most.
Yes, every single year.
Okay.
And at that point, so there are negative and positive factions coming from Sirius. He was trying to open doorways to bring the certain ones from Sirius through here. When I started to get close to what was going on with that and what was going on with the dog days, they wanted me out, and I was okay. It was fine. There was a couple of other things on the 13th of August and the 14th of August, there was a couple more attacks that I had. Out of nowhere, my whole apartment became infested with cockroaches within a 24-hour period. Cockroaches coming out of everywhere. So
now, is that an actual placement of them, or is it somebody did materialize them in? Or?
I think that I was being. It was the heaviest attack that I've ever had.
I mean, this is the kind of thing you only sort of see in horror movies.
Yes, and it was absolutely real. On top of that...
So how did you get rid of them? What happened?
I went and told the landlady, I said, this is going on, and I had to stay out of the apartment for a week, and she sprayed everything, and got rid of the majority of them. They didn't come back.
And has this happened to other people? I mean, was it just a dirty apartment, or...
No,
this was a block. I mean, was this something...
No, it was a very nice apartment. Yeah. And it was... But then the number of the apartment was 222, which is... It's a resonance of me because that's my birthday, 222. But
and the important thing about resonances is that's a mechanism of getting things through.
Yes, 222 is also a doorway. Right next to the front door of the apartment, there was a hall, like an archway like this, and 3 o'clock in the morning again. On the 13th, I think, I thought I got out of bed. I went to go over. I heard a noise, and something came out of the wall. What it was, I think I was dreaming, but I was half dreaming, half awake. It looked like the stereotypical what predator looks like. I don't know what they are. I had never seen one before, but when it came close to me like this. It was still for a second, and then it screamed in my face to invoke as much fear as possible. I had learned at that point. I was had a deep understanding of solfeggio and sound harmonics, and I knew the harmonics to do with my voice to try and help it, to try and get rid of it. I did this sound, which is the HU, H-U. It's a certain frequency sound, and when I did it, it sort of got back into there. This period of time...
This is important. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be that sound from anybody else's voice. For your voice,
yeah,
it works.
Yes. Yeah, the HU sound, yes.
Yeah.
You can find that on YouTube.
But for other people, it wouldn't necessarily work. Because of basically the resonance of the voice is the important thing.
Yes. There are certain sounds, there is a certain sound that they cannot stand, that they panic and they run away from. And
like in this spoof science fiction comedy film, Alien Invasions from Mars or whatever it is.
Oh, Mars Attacks.
Mars Attacks.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth in that movie.
They used yodeling country music as a means.
That's funny. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was I stayed in that apartment.
Just while we're on the movie, anything in that's as true that...
Well, I don't know that movie as well. I know They Live, and in the movie They Live, and in They Live, there is a sound, there is a frequency, I don't know if you remember it towards the end, that Roddy Piper goes to, and it's a frequency that's being beamed out, which enables these aliens to look in human form. And when he breaks this frequency, then they're all seen. Yeah, I've noticed since we've changed to digital now, my senses have become extremely heightened, and even when I'm just listening to the TV, or even when you turn the volume down, I hear this sound frequency coming from the television that completely messes with my pineal gland.
Now this is important because another member of the base's back room, so to speak,
right.
The thing is that he had devised a device to encrypt records on CDs so that it wouldn't be able to be copied.
Right.
But it was a type of acoustic thing as opposed to some kind of digital trademark encryption.
Right.
And when he played this in the record executive of the board, a number of the board just freaked out because they were reptilian. So he
completely freaked out, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a particular sound
that they cannot stand,
yes.
Yeah, because it alters the holographic projection that they're keeping. And I think it's a misconception that they are actually shape-shifting. Some are, but it's a misconception. Yeah. What they're actually doing is altering your visual cortex to make you think you're seeing them that way.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And this is very important as well, because you can that's the truth. They're not actually looking that way. They've just manipulated your mind to think that they are.
And that must work through all kind of visual media. Otherwise, you'd see a lot of these aliens walking around on TV.
Absolutely, yeah. I've noticed a lot of newsreaders, because they're doing that as an indoctrination and conditioning. If you look at newsreaders, because they're the ones who are in your house every day. Look carefully at the newsreaders. It's slowly drip, conditioning you to accept.
BBC is the worst, I think.
Yes.
I mean, ITV, I can't watch it.
I heard somewhere that the true acronym of BBC, and it's not British Broadcasting Company, and I can't remember it now. But you might want to look into that. Yeah. Also it comes up to 7. Nice. B2, and C3. 7 is the number of the serpent.
Right. And it's interesting that in the early days of broadcasting, it was a British Broadcasting Company.
Ah, okay.
Not corporations.
Not corporations, so now it's... Okay,
yeah,
okay.
So a lot of things... There's some radio amateurs who are twigged about broadcasting. Something happened.
Yes.
They're beginning to see, look, when broadcasting started and we adopted the types of broadcasting we use,
sure.
They've noticed that something started to happen in society.
Yes.
And this, of course, links with my stuff with Caroline and all that sort of stuff.
Can I just go...
Waffling about MK Ultra switching off at 30.
Yeah. Okay, so I can tell you what happened then. So in March of 2008, I was living in a shared house in the north part of the San Fernando Valley, which is in Los Angeles, and I started. I mean, I never had voices in my head. I never had that. I never had that before. I just sort of had an understanding. But that night in March of 2008, right around, just after when Heath Ledger died, and Heath Ledger, he played the Joker in Batman.
Oh.
He died on January the 22nd, which is interesting because the number 22 is in sync with the Joker card and the Fool card in the tarot card deck. And so there was, there's all the...
and being a Joker and all that.
Absolutely, yes.
So you're suggesting that basically the Batman movies has got some kind of ritual magic involved?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And
so why was he murdered? What did he...
He was murdered... his real father... wasn't the father that that is shown to the public. His real father was a very famous actor, and I've forgotten his name now. He did a lot of theatre in the 50s and 60s. I forget his name. When I remember it, I'll let you know.
Why is it necessary to have a different father than your real
Well,
one?
they often will take...
In the public domain?
They'll often take, because they don't want any association, and they like to try experiments, and a lot of it is lab rat stuff to test out. But
I mean, there's also, you get lumbered with being so-and-so's father, and nobody watches you because of that.
Right.
Oh, I think you just will make sure your plug's in.
Anyways, so in March of 2008, some strange things started happening to me. I had some extremely vivid dreams, and then I got taken out of my body and shown that my life, as I thought it was not. The memories that I had, my childhood memories, were not what I quite thought they were. And for about a 2 weeks period of time, I was shown memory after memory after memory of what was really going on. And I remember being taken to underground facilities at different points, some of them in Sussex, some of them in Kent, and some of them with people who I knew from school, but would have no clue that they were involved at all. And I would sort of come to on a minibus, or a bus where there were 3 of us on one side, 3 of us on the other side, and sort of in a dazed state. And then we'd go somewhere and then black out again. And this sort of led for me to... I was seeing it from in the corner of the room, but we would being given tests, and they would give something.
Who was giving you?
Who was giving? Okay, so there was a woman at the front.
How was she dressed? I mean,
she was dressed not uniform, but very well dressed. You know, dressed up as if she was a banker or a businesswoman.
Well, that must imply that it's in some very salubrious environment where she has to be dressed.
Yes, and there was also...
there was a place that's in public domain.
Yes, but it was underground. So it was below. I'm not talking seriously underground, but it was below wherever.
I mean, you were taken down in the lifts. How do you know you were underground?
Well, I was driven down. There was a slope that we were driven down under, and then it was down there. Me and these 5 other kids that were there, some boys, some girls, but when we were there, we were sort of in a dazed state, so we weren't communicating with each other.
Can you remember any way on how you were collected?
Really, I only remember all of a sudden being in the van. I don't remember being taken. I just remember all of a sudden being in the van, and being sitting in sort of like rows of desks, and then it was very cold, and it wasn't warm. There was no warmth coming from the people that were there. There was a male who was standing by the door, a female at the front dressed as I was saying, and then somebody would bring round sort of, but it wasn't a Rubik's Cube though, but it was like an unfold. It was like there's something called Rubik's Magic, and it's where you unfold it like this, and then you have to put it in again and fold it to try and make. And they were doing tests to see how fast certain ones were able to do it.
That explains. It's one way of testing a form of visual conceptual thinking.
Cognitive, yes, yes. And I felt like, but when they put it down initially, I was like, what am I supposed to do? I have no clue what I'm supposed to do. And then they said, just do it. And then I started touching it, and as soon as I started touching it, I immediately knew how to do it, and I did it very fast. So some of the other kids, and the kids were at the time when this was going on were about 5, 6, 7 years old. So I was looking back at a previous memory rather than something that was happening now.
Is this painful to remember?
It's because it's so because it doesn't fit into the timeline of what I thought my life was. It's sort of very confusing. It doesn't make sense. Who allowed that to happen? Why was that okay? Where were my parents at the time? I remember, and this sort of ties in as well, when I was living in Lewes, which is in Sussex as well, I was very close friends with a little girl. Her name was Meredith Kennedy, and I was very close with her. Both of her parents were scientists, and often they used to take her and I to Sussex University lab, lab there, and I remember getting in the car and being driven there. But then when we'd get driven there, the mother or the father would leave, and then we'd be left in the car. And then some strange things would happen in the car. I kept thinking the car was rolling, and then sort of went dizzy, came to, came back again. But I have flashes of memories going inside of the lab. Now, recently I've looked into it more, and Sussex University is an arm. There is an arm of Tavistock that works right out of Sussex University. And my very close friend at the time, Meredith Kennedy, her mother also worked for Stanford Research Institute. So she used to go back and forth from Stanford to Sussex University. And Stanford then was actually continuing the work that Tavistock had done. Which began by Freud and some other ones there, so that they could completely understand how to split the mind and basically program one personality into the left brain and one personality into the right brain, where each one, I mean, it's sort of similar to trauma-based mind control, where you create alters, but this was very specific, so they would play...
So they could do that without the trauma?
This particular one was being done without trauma. I mean, there was enough trauma that I was left there without knowing.
So it's not working. The trauma thing is a crude way of doing it.
The trauma, they're not really interested in they're interested in trying out all different types of methods. This particular one, which was done by a doctor called Robert Spiers, Sperry. And he was one of the Nazi scientists, and what he wanted to try and do was to see if he could play sounds, words, stories, music to one side of the brain, and then play completely separate one to the other side of the brain. So then it confuses the brain and splits it off. So then you can program one and program the other, which then creates massive confusion as the child gets older, because it's not sure whether it's coming or going, sort of thing. This also induces addiction, because then they created pharmaceuticals that were specifically made for people who'd gone through that trauma. A lot of the opiates that were created in the United States were made specifically because they knew that these kids were going to search that out and find it and become addicts to it.
And this is important because in the Channel 4 program Confessions of an Alien Abductee, they made a big issue of Chantel and the Kentucky Fried Chicken. So the placement of Kentucky Fried Chicken with the special mix in that, it's been described by others as an abduction food.
Really?
Yes. So the use of that could be a double trigger. So
KFC in itself is a basic anagram of fuck, right? If you just switch those around the other way. Well, also
is the old grandfather image on that a trigger as well?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And the grandfather image on there, if somebody from Asia looks at this man's face, it looks Asian to them. If a white person looks at it, it looks white to them.
Right.
It's very, very cleverly done like that. And the man who was behind KFC doesn't quite look like that, but he was also a master programmer, handler, slave handler. And when the trauma was done by him, you would be shown a face of this KFC, the actual thing. So you'd flash that face, so you'd keep being drawn to it.
Now, I have to say that me even mentioning that person's name will trigger her. I'll get a huge amount of abuse immediately for saying that.
Okay.
Because it triggers, and I think that means that relevant people involved at Channel 4 were deliberately triggering. And it should be interesting to note that Marie Kayali, when she was waiting at the station to come down to do the 4 programs she was doing with me in Wiltshire, met the producer of that program. But anyway, that's a side issue.
Really? Okay.
Totally random issues.
Yes.
Improbable probability.
Yes. Now, towards the end of this thing that happened to me in March, I was spending time with two, a male and a female, who were older than me, 20 years older than me. And I don't want to mention their names because I don't want to cause them any trouble, but I do know that they were assets, and that I can mention the name of one of them. His name was James Chandler. And he was maybe in his mid to late 50s. He grew up on an Air Force base. He grew up from when he was
That's a familiar name. I've heard something like that. Somewhere
Now,
before.
Chandler, you take the C off, you have Handler. Now, when I was going through this massive trauma in this onslaught of memories that came back in March, he said to me, look, come round, everything's going to be fine, come round here. And I was having an extreme, I didn't know where I was. I would wake up, go to my car in the morning, I'd look on the ground of my car, and I would see receipts that said that I'd bought something at 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was sound asleep in bed at that time. So, no, I found the receipts. So what had been happening
was there any dirt in your clothes or anything at all to indicate that you'd been outside physically?
I woke up with clothes on. So I had gone out and I had done something and bought something, and I had absolutely no clue. So anyway, I went round to these people's houses, and I sat down on the ground in the house, and these two people were there, and they said, Max, why don't you have a lay down? Have a lay down. You know, you don't seem very well. You're bright red. Nothing's. You know, you seem like you need. So I lay down on the ground, put my head on a cushion. As soon as I put my head on the cushion, I felt like I sunk into the ground. I then became paralyzed. I couldn't move my legs or my arms. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could hear everything that was going on. Within about a couple of minutes after that, I could hear bells ringing, and I could hear these things, sort of incense smelling. And I heard a chain like this being, like there was something here, and it was like incense being spun around like this. I heard the changing of clothes, and I heard ringing, stuff like that. Now I heard them talking about that that they had been waiting to place whatever this ritual was going on. They had been waiting for it, and it had to be done in this house, and they were going to try and attempt to place I don't know what you'd call it. It was some sort of entity that had been locked down for a very long period of time.
What do you mean by an entity locked down?
Okay. Well, when they started to do I was stripped naked, and when they started to do this ritual, there was some form of sex magic going on in the ritual, and then I felt something, I heard sounds, and I felt something being placed into my body.
Now, before we get there, when you say what sort of creature, what's a long time, any idea?
Well, I saw it in my mind's eye, and what I saw in my mind's eye was an enormous sort of a minotaur-looking being with two horns, muscular, red, green, and it had been shackled, had been chained by its ankles, chained here like this, and I could smell burning rock. I could smell it very, 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 very strongly, but I couldn't move. Okay, then I saw whatever was going on, then was projected and put in, layered slowly over with the words that were being said. I heard chanting and words that were being said that was layered into, that somehow attached to my chakra energy points, because I was at a weak point. Generally, when you're at your weakest point is when they'll go for it and do it. Then I blacked out, nothing more. The next thing I know, I'm sitting on a couch. I'm sitting back on a couch, and I feel extremely powerful. I feel like I want to jump up and run a marathon. I felt so strong. Now the woman came in and she said to me, Max, you haven't been doing too well. Why don't you take a drink of this? I go, what is it? She said, it's electrolytes, and it's this and it's that, and it was bubbling, and it was in a cup like that. And I had a feeling inside of me that said, do not drink this, because if you drink it, it's going to reinforce whatever has been done, and you will be stuck. So I was sitting there with it for about 5 or 10 minutes, and she was saying, why haven't you drank it? Why haven't you drank it? And I sipped it, and it tasted unusual. She came in again, and I spilt it all everywhere on the ground. She panicked like that, went left, went back, and made another one and brought it in. And this time I did drink it. And after I drank it, I was sitting there for more. I felt like the feelings I had were like I could get up, I could lift up. I had extreme strength. Okay? So I was left there. Then the other guy, whose name is James.
Could you actually lift things up?
Yes. Yes, right. I felt like my strength has increased by 5-10 times.
So you essentially seem to have been programmed with the strength of a minotaur. And the minotaur being half human, half bull?
Yes. Then they brought me some food. Okay, they said, look, you've got to eat. When I tried to eat a sandwich, they brought me a Subway of all things. When I took a bite of the Subway tasted like burning metal. Every time I took a bite out of it, it tasted like burning metal. So I spat it out and put it on the ground. Now I asked myself in my head what's going on, and then something said to me, you're tasting that because the thing that has been placed inside of you has been biting on these chains for thousands and thousands of years, and now you have taken on that inside of you, so everything is going to taste like that. But not to worry, it's only going to last 3 days, and it'll be gone, and you'll feel fine again. So this that went on. 2 hours later, after that, something happened, and my body went rigid, and whatever was inside of me was rejected and left. And then I felt it walked out. I mean, it left me, and
how did it do? It
sort of like, I felt whatever it was couldn't stick, or didn't stick, and sort of moved out like that. At that point, this guy James Chandler brought a picture of somebody who's related to me over, and showed me this picture, and then they said, if it doesn't stick in you, it will certainly stick in him. And don't worry about that, it's failed for you. So then as it's failed, then you need to be taken out. And so then I got this terrible fear that I'm
going to kill you.
Yes. And so this went on, and I went back into the other room and crashed out and fell asleep again. When I fell asleep again, there was two officers, what seemed like Nazi officers, standing either side of me. And
what uniforms did they have?
They had the old World War II uniforms, from what I can understand, the stereotypical Nazi World War II uniforms, and they were standing either side of me. And they had told me that what's going on right now is that there have been 100-year war battles for the last 1,000 years. And at the turn of every century, these wars are won or lost. And each time, and that he said that this particular faction had been winning for time after time after time after time. They said they set up all of the Formula One wins, all the World Cup wins were all set up to show how much in power they are.
Yeah.
Okay, and
it's interesting that a lot of horse racing things seem to have magical logos on them.
Yes.
In horse racing.
Yeah, and it's basically a ritual every time. But they showed me the seals over where they'd won. So they were gold seals, one on top of the other, on top of the other. And they said that the final battle is now happening now, and that they were already in a position to win. And they were thanking me. And I said, well, look, I don't know. I haven't done anything. I don't know anything about it. And they said, because you don't remember yet. Then I crashed out of sleep again. I haven't ever talked about this, Miles. I crashed out of sleep again. Then there was a thing. It looked like a gargoyle, but it was as big as this room and had black wings, like bat wings. Picked me up like this, pulled me back away from the earth like that. So I saw the earth like this. There were rings around the earth, different colored rings around the earth. And this thing pointed out each one of these was thought prisons, were a thought prison. And he said, it doesn't matter which one of the people on this planet get caught up. It doesn't matter which thought prison they get caught up in, whether it's Scientology, whether it's Christianity, whether it's atheism, it doesn't make any difference. As long as you are magnetically drawn to one of them, we have you. And he explained how all the thought prisons were layered around the planet. And he explained how they were made, and
how were they made?
They were made with the will of the creator beings that want to keep this place together.
So that is the will of the Archon, or what? Is her name, or does it make any difference if there's a name?
This particular group, I feel the ones who I was talking to were connected to the Alpha Draconis star system. And I do believe that the Aldebaran group and that the Alpha Draconis group are at war. And I believe that it's been an ongoing war for eons and eons and eons. and the Aldebaran group, which is the bullseye, which in the Taurus constellation, where you see the left red eye. That's why you have this symbol all the time. It's an acknowledgement to the Aldebaran people. It's called the Royal Star. All of the British royal family are directly connected to the Aldebaran